Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
Easter dinner at my parents' place has always been a thing. Same dishes, same stories, same overcooked ham, and the same damn tension that clings to the walls like the smell of baked pineapple and boiled carrots. Every year, Ben, my older brother by 3 years and 100 inflated accomplishments, slides into his seat at the head of the table like he earned it. Like it's a throne. Like he didn't get that spot just because Dad always carved the turkey on that end and Ben always sat next to him, soaking in approval like it was sunlight and he was the family plant. This year was no different. Except that it was. I was back in town after closing the kind of deal that makes people Google your name. Quietly, of course. No interviews, no press photos. Just a few lines on LinkedIn and a company-wide email sent at 4 p.m. on a Friday. That's how I like it. That's how I operate under radar over results. But Ben operates like a goddamn foghorn in a library. Loud, persistent, and absolutely convinced the world needs to hear every word he says. So there we were, mashed potatoes being passed, Dad already 2 scotches in, and Ben launching into his latest diatribe about how the tech industry is not for the weak. Something about hustle culture, tension deliverables, and some nonsense about emotional intelligence being overrated. I wasn't even listening at first. I was more focused on trying to cut the dry turkey breast without it crumbling into sawdust. But then he said it. Not everyone, he said, leaning back like a king at court, can handle a real career in tech. He looked around the table like he expected applause or at least a nod from Dad. And sure enough, Dad gave it. That quiet grunt of agreement he only uses when Ben's talking. The kind of sound that meant, "That's my boy," always aiming high. I didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Just took a slow sip of red wine while my brain filed that one away. I saw Grandma Jean glance at me. She didn't say anything yet, but her eyes narrowed, and that's always the warning shot with her. Then came the next round of boasting. Ben talking about how he had to lay off a third of his team last month, said it with a weird pride, like cutting people loose made him some kind of badass leader. He called it right-sizing. I called it bullshit. He laughed, said I probably wouldn't understand, since I wasn't really in the trenches. I could see Mom shifting in her seat, trying to diffuse things before they turned into one of those passive-aggressive minefields that lasted all weekend. She asked him how the company was doing, and he started throwing out numbers, revenue projections, Q1 losses, investor pressure. All of it sounded impressive unless you actually knew what it meant. Which I did. I kept quiet. Not because I was afraid to speak, but because I wanted to see how far he'd go digging his own grave before someone handed him a flashlight. That someone turned out to be Grandma. Now, for context, Grandma Jean is pushing 90, but still sharp enough to do her own taxes, roast a full chicken, and destroy egos like she's playing whack-a-mole. She's always played the long game in this family. The matriarch, the observer, the one who remembers everything and forgets nothing. She waited until the moment Ben took a breath between Q4 pivot strategy and managing up the chain of command. Then she casually turned to me, all innocence and butter wouldn't melt in her mouth's sweetness, and asked the question that would flip the entire table dynamic on its smug little head. Is that why your company just bought his, Ethan? I swear to God, you could have heard a pin drop. Not just a pin. A dust particle. A breath. A heartbeat. Ben froze. Fork halfway to his mouth. Dad stopped chewing mid-bite, which almost never happens unless someone dies or the power goes out. Mom stared at her wine glass like it held the secrets of the universe. And me? I just kept chewing my roll like nothing happened, like she hadn't just lit a match in a room full of propane. Ben blinked. Once. Twice. Then chuckled a little too loud, a little too fake. It wasn't like that, he said, voice rising half a note higher than usual. It was a merger. A strategic alignment of mutual interests. Grandma raised an eyebrow. She said, the way only grandmas can when they know you're full of shit, but want to watch you squirm a bit longer. I didn't say a word. Not yet. Because when the truth is loaded and ready, you don't waste the first shot. You aim for impact. What Ben didn't know, and what no one at that table besides me and Grandma had any idea about, was that I'd spent the last 8 months watching his company circle the drain from a front row seat. And when the time was right, when the board was desperate, when the layoffs hit, when morale was scraping bottom, I made my move. Clean. Legal. Efficient. And now his name was on the org chart under mine. I didn't do it for revenge. But damn if it didn't taste like it. So, there we were. Easter dinner. My brother, red-faced. My parents, stunned. And my grandmother, smiling like a cat who'd just knocked a vase off the table and dared you to scold her for it. There was no second act to that moment. Just silence. Pure, uncomfortable, beautiful silence. Because sometimes, the loudest thing in the room is the truth nobody saw coming. And as I reached for the gravy, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. This was just the first crack in the perfect little mirror my brother had built around himself. And I was going to let it break, piece by piece, with the softest damn smile on my face. Just like Grandma taught me. You ever notice how some families don't even bother hiding their favorite? Ours wasn't subtle about it. Ben was the golden child from the minute he popped out with a full head of hair and a smug little cry like he already knew he'd own the place. I came 3 years later, quieter, squishier, and, from the looks of it, more of an afterthought than a plan. My mom always said I was her surprise gift, but if you looked at how things shook out over the years, it felt more like I was the consolation prize for parents already too tired to give a second kid their full attention. Ben got the cheers. I got the checklists. Growing up, he got the best of everything before I even had a chance to know it was something I wanted. First bike? Shiny red, handpicked from the nicest store in town. By the time I was big enough to ride, I got his old one, spray-painted blue, wheels already crooked. First car? A used but pristine Civic with a stereo loud enough to piss off the neighbors. Mine? Mom's old Taurus that smelled like feet and despair. When he screwed up, they called it ambition. When I did something right, it was either luck or background noise. I wasn't angry, not then. Anger requires heat, and back then all I had was cold resolve. A slow burn. A quiet kind of inventory that I started keeping in the back of my mind. Ben was loud, charming, always in the spotlight. Homecoming court. Varsity soccer. Dean's list. Every damn family photo had him front and center, chest out like he invented confidence. I was always somewhere near the edge of the frame, usually blinking or holding someone else's jacket. People talked about Ben like he was destined for something, maybe politics, maybe business, something shiny and important. Me? I was the quiet one, the smart one, the one who liked computers. Which in the 90s basically meant, we don't know what the hell he's doing, but at least he's not doing drugs. When college rolled around, it wasn't even a discussion. Ben got into MIT, early decision, full of swagger and student loans. The whole damn family hosted a barbecue like he'd just been drafted by NASA. I went to community college 3 towns over and didn't even get a card. I didn't mind, not really. I knew early on I'd never win by playing his game, and trying to outshine Ben at his own parade would just get me trampled. So I started playing a different game altogether. One with longer timelines. One with fewer cheers but higher stakes. Ben majored in something that sounded impressive, computer science with a business minor, and spent summers interning at companies with names you'd recognize. I, meanwhile, spent mine freelancing under a fake company name because clients wouldn't take me seriously otherwise. I built websites, fixed busted networks, and taught myself to code like my future depended on it, because, frankly, it did. I still remember the summer after his junior year when I called him to ask for help on a problem I was stuck on. I figured, brother to brother, he might throw me a bone. He laughed. Not a chuckle. A full-on laugh like I'd asked him to clean my toilet or do my taxes. told me to Google it like the rest of us. I never forgot that. Not because it hurt, which it did, but because it told me exactly what kind of person he was underneath all that polish. And it told me I'd never ask him for anything again. After that, I got serious. I dropped out of community college not because I couldn't hack it, but because I realized I didn't need the degree to build what I was building. I taught myself the rest. I learned by doing, by screwing up, by rebuilding from scratch more times than I can count. I learned to code in 3 languages, launched small tools and apps, flipped a few small projects, and eventually started a company that no one had heard of, but it made money, real money. While Ben was climbing the corporate ladder, carefully calculating how to impress the next manager up the chain, I was quietly building my own. Over the years, we drifted like 2 ships in different currents. He'd pop up at family events in overpriced suits, name-dropping his company's latest product, bragging about bonuses and conferences. I'd come in jeans, usually late, say as little as possible, and leave early. Nobody knew what I did, and I liked it that way. They assumed I was just coasting, maybe doing freelance work, maybe living in a basement. Let them. I didn't need their approval, I needed time. And time, thankfully, was something I'd learned to invest better than any of them. So when Ben's company started spiraling, I saw it before he did. I followed the trends, the layoffs, the bad hires, the bloated structure. I watched their burn rate outpace their growth. And when the board started making noise about restructuring, I made a few phone calls. By then, my company had resources, leverage, and most importantly, no emotional baggage. I didn't target Ben. I targeted inefficiency, opportunity, mismanagement. The fact that he came as part of the package? That was just a little cosmic joke I couldn't help but appreciate. The night before Easter dinner, I sat in my office alone, holding the signed acquisition contract in my hands. The ink was barely dry. I'd read it a dozen times already, but it still felt surreal. This document that essentially put my older brother's career, his ego, his entire narrative, under my name. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even victory. It was something else. Something quieter. Like finally scratching an itch you've had for 30 years. Not satisfying exactly, but necessary. I could have told my parents right then. Could have called Ben, let him know ahead of time, given him a chance to save face. But I didn't, because some truths aren't for sparing. Some truths deserve the slow reveal. Especially when the whole damn family's watching. And especially when the one person who never doubted you, your 90-year-old grandmother with eyes sharper than any investor's, knows exactly what you've done before you've said a word. You could feel the temperature of the room drop, like someone had opened a freezer door and forgotten to close it again. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything. The silence wasn't peaceful, it had a shape to it, like thick smoke curling between each word that had just been spoken, wrapping around every place setting, every fork and napkin and untouched deviled egg on that long oak table. My brother Ben sat there, jaw slightly open, blinking like someone had just hit him with a stun gun right between the eyes, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, he had absolutely nothing to say. Grandma had just torched him in front of everybody, and it was the kind of thing you can't come back from with a quick joke or a smirk. You can't laugh off your baby brother owning the company you just got kicked out of. Not even Ben, king of the confident shrug and corporate jargon, could polish that turd. I took a slow sip of my wine, just enough to let it linger, just enough to give him space to dig himself deeper, because I knew that's exactly what he was about to do. Mom, God bless her eternal optimism, jumped in the way a person does when they see a car crash about to happen, but still believe they can stop it with a soft voice and a well-placed hand on the shoulder. She said something about how companies merge all the time these days, about how it's just business, about how maybe we shouldn't talk shop over dinner. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were pleading, darting between us like she could will this whole moment into something less humiliating for her firstborn. Dad didn't say a damn word, which wasn't exactly surprising. He was never much for emotional expression unless it involved the football team losing or a screw-up at work. He just kept chewing on his overdone ham like it was rubber, and he was trying to wear it down with sheer jaw strength. But I could see it in his shoulders, the way they'd tensed up, the way his fork was gripped just a little too tightly. He was listening, and he wasn't pleased. Ben finally found his voice, though it cracked when he used it. "It's not what you think," he said, trying to pull together some version of his usual arrogant cool. "It's not like I work for him now. It's a merger. Two equal companies combining forces. Standard strategic move." I didn't even look at him. Just cut into my potatoes, cold by then, mashed into a shape that vaguely resembled a passive-aggressive insult in food form, and let him keep going. "We're consolidating leadership," he continued, trying to sound like a press release. "There's a transition period. Nothing changes overnight." It was funny, watching him lie to himself in real time, like maybe if he said it out loud enough times it would become true, and the sinking ship he'd been steering would suddenly be back on course just because he refused to admit it had hit an iceberg. Then he turned to me, like he'd just remembered I was in the room. "Besides," he said, cocking his head in that way that always used to get him out of trouble, "you wouldn't really understand. You're more of a freelancer, right?" It hung there, that little word, freelancer, like it was a disease or a dirty habit I hadn't been able to quit. He said it soft, but with that sharpness he always saved for when he wanted to cut me in front of others without looking like the one who'd started the fight. And that's when I said it. "Yeah," I told him, my voice even, calm, surgical. "The kind who signed your severance package last week." It didn't even feel like a punch. It felt like flipping a light switch. One second the room had tension, the next it was just me holding a mirror up to his bullshit and letting him see what the rest of us had known for years. He blinked again, looked at me like I was speaking another language, like the rules of our entire lives had just been rewritten while he wasn't looking. And in a way, they had. Because for the first time ever, I wasn't letting him talk over me. I wasn't dodging his jabs or pretending not to care. I was laying it bare, clean and simple, no fireworks needed. That was the moment Dad stood up. He didn't say anything, just stood, slowly, quietly, pushing his chair back like it weighed more than it should have, and walked out of the room. No dramatic exit, no angry glare. Just silence and footsteps. And that was somehow worse. Because if he'd yelled, if he'd shouted, it would have been familiar. Expected. But this silence felt final, like the part in a story where someone closes a door and you know it's not going to open again. Ben sat there, staring after him, mouth twitching like he wanted to explain himself, but couldn't find the words. Mom reached for his hand, but he pulled away, eyes still locked on the hallway where Dad had disappeared. Grandma just went back to her carrots, chewing slowly, methodically, as if she'd seen it all before and wasn't surprised by any of it. I didn't move. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to, because some victories aren't loud. They don't come with cheers or applause. They come with silence. With the kind that settles in your chest and makes it hard to breathe, not from sadness, but from the weight of truth finally dropping into place. And as I looked around the table at the people who used to see me as the shadow of the man sitting across from me, I realized something I hadn't dared to admit until that exact moment. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to him. Not to Dad. Not to any of them. I had already won. It didn't start with a master plan or some vendetta I'd been carrying like a loaded weapon for the past 20 years. No, it started, like most significant things in my life, in silence and observation. My company, lean and focused, had been steadily growing for the past 5 years. No investors breathing down our necks, no bloated leadership team, just a handful of people who knew what they were doing and actually cared whether it worked. We weren't flashy. We weren't in TechCrunch or wearing Patagonia vests at every conference. We just built things that worked and made money doing it, month after month, without needing anyone's approval. Ben's company, on the other hand, was the kind that got press for announcing things it hadn't built yet, throwing launch parties for products still in beta, hemorrhaging talent while upper management held yoga retreats and issued vague LinkedIn statements about resilience. I'd been watching them slowly fall apart from a distance for almost a year, not because I had it out for them, but because I make it my business to notice inefficiencies. And Ben's company, though it had once been a darling, had become a case study in how to ruin something good through arrogance and bloated spending. When I first heard the whisper that they might be looking to align with a partner, it was from a friend who casually mentioned it over coffee, the way you might mention the weather. "You know, they're bleeding talent," he said, tapping the side of his mug. "Wouldn't surprise me if they started shopping around." I smiled and nodded, but my brain had already started crunching numbers, pulling threads, laying out a map in the quiet way it always does when I smell blood in the water. I didn't pounce, though. I waited. Because timing is everything, especially in this business. 3 months later, I got the email. A contact at a shared venture capital firm reached out to feel me out. Informal discussion, he called it, about potential synergies. Translation: they're desperate, and you look stable. I played it cool, even though I already knew what I wanted. I wasn't interested in bailing them out, but I was interested in what they had: engineering talent, some key patents, a customer base that overlapped with ours in all the right ways. I told them we could talk, but it would be on my terms. And quietly. No leaks, no hype. Just numbers and structure. Negotiations weren't fast. They never are when you're dealing with egos the size of small planets. But what struck me from the start was how nobody mentioned Ben. Not once. He wasn't in the deck. He wasn't on the call. He wasn't even in the background. Which told me everything I needed to know about where he stood. They had already written him off, boxed him into a corner, and now they were trying to clean up the mess without saying the word failure out loud. I almost didn't believe it until the org chart arrived. I was in my office late on a Thursday, the kind of night when the air feels thick with momentum, when decisions feel like physical objects you can hold in your hand. The document came through in a password-protected folder with a generic subject line, just another piece of paper in a stack of many. But when I opened it, there it was. His name, Ben Keller, Director of Product Development, reporting directly to me. I stared at that box for a long time, not smiling, not gloating. Just still. It was surreal. I hadn't seen his name in a context where I had authority over it since we were kids, back when I used to manage the score sheets for our backyard basketball games because I wasn't allowed to play unless I kept track of the points. Now I was keeping score again, only this time, the game wasn't pretend and the points were very, very real. I didn't tell anyone. Not my girlfriend, not my co-founder, not even grandma. I let it sit in my chest like a stone dropped in a lake, ripples spreading quietly outward. I didn't want to gloat. Gloating implies you needed the win to validate yourself, and by then, I didn't. I just wanted the paperwork to go through, the transition to be clean, and the deal to be done before anyone said anything they couldn't take back. I wasn't prepared for Easter. I should have been. I should have seen it coming the moment Grandma asked what I'd been working on lately, and I gave her a vague answer about acquisitions. She saw through it instantly, of course. She always does. But I didn't think she'd drop the bomb at dinner. I thought maybe she'd pull me aside in the kitchen, give me a knowing look, maybe a sarcastic, "So I guess you're the boss now." But no. She said it out loud. Said it with that razor-sharp calm that made the whole room freeze like a still from a family drama with terrible lighting and even worse secrets. And then, after the tension, after the silence, after Ben tried to spin it, and I shut him down with a single sentence, he waited until dessert was being cleared to corner me, pulled me aside with a hand on my arm just firm enough to make a point, and led me out onto the back deck like we were about to have a heart-to-heart instead of a showdown. "What the hell was that?" he hissed, his voice sharp and low and full of something that was not quite anger but damn close to panic. "You couldn't just let it go?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw it for the first time. He wasn't mad that I beat him. He was scared. Because I wasn't playing the game anymore. I'd rewritten the rules, and he didn't even know what page we were on. And the worst part? He still thought it was salvageable. Still thought he could talk his way out. Still didn't get that it was already done. Final. Signed. Filed. So I said nothing. Just looked out at the yard where we used to play catch, where he used to throw too hard on purpose, where I used to pretend it didn't hurt. And I let the silence do the talking. The back porch creaked under our feet the way old wood does when it's trying to warn you that what's coming next can't be taken back. The night air had that kind of brittle chill you only get in early spring, like winter hadn't fully let go yet, and neither had we. Ben was pacing in tight, clipped strides, every movement like a spark from a wire frayed too far. His hands were clenched into fists even though he wasn't about to throw one. Not really, not yet. His face had lost that calm, smug control he wore like a badge of honor, and now it was raw, flushed, jaw tight like he was chewing on glass, but couldn't spit it out. "You planned this," he said, not a question, not even a real accusation, more like a desperate flail toward a version of events that made him less pathetic. "You schemed this whole damn thing. You've been sitting there waiting for me to fall, just so you could swoop in and play the hero. Or the villain. Hell, I don't even know which one you think you are anymore." I didn't answer right away. I just leaned against the railing and watched the backyard, the same square of grass where we used to chase each other around until somebody cried, usually me, usually from him pushing just a little too hard and calling it a joke. The same patch of dirt where we'd buried a time capsule once, convinced our future selves would be legends by now. Ben stepped closer, voice rising, fingers twitching like he didn't know what to do with the anger storming around inside him. "You always hated me for being better," he said, eyes blazing. "Smarter, faster, more driven. You never had the guts to play at my level, so you waited until I slipped and kicked me while I was down. Real noble, Ethan." That's when I turned, slowly, calmly, and met his eyes with something he hadn't seen from me in a long, long time. Clarity. Not rage. Not pain. Not even pride. Just the stillness of someone who didn't need his approval anymore. "You never outshone me," I said, not raising my voice, not rushing my words. "You just talked louder." That landed. Not like a punch, but like a truth so simple it couldn't be argued with. Ben flinched, barely, and that's when I saw the shift. His eyes narrowed, his body coiled, and in one fluid, reflexive motion, he stepped forward and grabbed a fistful of my shirt. Old habits die hard, don't they? It was instinct, pure and stupid and full of history. He'd done that same move 100 times when we were kids on the field, in the hallway, in the garage when I touched his stuff. The alpha act, the chest-puffing bullshit that always got him what he wanted because no one ever called him on it. Not teachers. Not our parents. Definitely not me. Until now. But I didn't flinch this time. I stood there, still as stone, letting him feel the difference, letting him register that the man he was grabbing wasn't the kid who used to shrink in his shadow. I didn't shove him back. I didn't raise a hand. I didn't need to. "We're not kids anymore, Ben," I said quietly, my voice a scalpel. "And I don't work for you." For a second, he just stood there, knuckles white, face inches from mine. Then he let go, slowly, fingers trembling like he wanted to hit something but knew it wouldn't help. He took a step back and laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that cracked under the weight of everything he didn't want to admit. "You think this makes you the better man?" he asked, voice shaky. "You think buying my company makes you worth something now?" "I never needed to buy your company to be worth something," I said, turning back toward the yard. "But apparently, I had to buy it to prove that to you." Behind us, through the kitchen window, the light was on. Grandma stood there, one hand resting on the counter, the other stirring something she probably didn't even plan on serving. But her eyes were fixed on us, sharp as ever, watching like the final judge in a courtroom we hadn't realized we'd entered. She smiled. Not a wide grin, not a victorious smirk. Just the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth, the kind of smile people wear when they see a storm finally breaking, or when a long-awaited truth finally slips out into the open and breathes. Ben didn't see her. Or maybe he did, but he couldn't face what her smile meant. He took another step back, shook his head, and muttered, "You're not who I thought you were." I didn't reply, because what was there to say? He was right. I wasn't. But the truth he'd never seen, and maybe still couldn't, was that I never wanted to be who he thought I was. I had spent too many years pretending that silence meant weakness, that humility meant submission, that success wasn't real unless someone else confirmed it. But now, standing there on the back porch with his fingers still warm from trying to drag me back into that old dynamic, I knew better. I had already left that version of myself behind. And maybe, just maybe, that's why he was really angry. Because for the first time in his life, he couldn't reach me, couldn't rattle me, couldn't win. And I didn't need to say a single word more to make that clear. The house had mostly settled by then, in that way it always does after a storm, not calm, exactly, but quiet in a tense and loaded way, like the walls were still processing what they'd heard and didn't quite know how to hold it all. The dishes had been stacked in the sink, the table cleared without ceremony, and the rest of the family had scattered to separate corners of the house like survivors drifting away from a shipwreck. Mom was upstairs folding laundry that didn't need folding. Ben was locked in the downstairs guest room pretending to check emails, and Dad had disappeared somewhere into the garage, where he tended to retreat when things cracked just enough to show feelings he didn't want to name. And me? I stood alone in the kitchen with the dim light casting long shadows on the linoleum floor, trying to remember how a holiday had managed to turn into a battleground. That's when Grandma walked in. She didn't say anything at first. Just entered like she always did, slow but steady, slippers brushing the tile, nightgown rustling softly, eyes clear and focused despite the hour. She moved to the stove, checked a pot she'd long since turned off, stirred it once with a wooden spoon like the act itself helped her think. I was leaning against the counter, arms folded, and for a moment we just existed in that space together, both of us saying nothing but somehow speaking volumes. Then she turned to me, that familiar gaze as sharp as it had been at dinner, and nodded toward the back hallway that led to the den. "Come on," she said, not as a request, but as a statement of inevitability. So I followed her, down the hall, past the creaky floorboard near the bathroom, into the small wood-paneled room where Shed kept her little treasures for decades, old books, faded photographs, knickknacks from flea markets she swore were antiques, and the smell of lemon polish and lavender that never seemed to fade. She sat down slowly in her old recliner, motioned for me to take the chair across from her, and reached into the drawer of the side table without looking. Her hand came out holding something wrapped in a piece of cloth, aged and worn, something she'd clearly kept hidden for a long time. She unwrapped it gently, and there it was, Grandpa's watch. It was a simple piece, not flashy or expensive, but it had weight to it. Not just physical weight, though it was solid in your palm, heavier than it looked. No, it had the weight of history, of expectation, of all the silent glances and unspoken lessons Grandpa used to give us back when he was still around. Everyone in the family had assumed it would go to Ben. Of course they did. The firstborn, the man of action, the one who always made noise about legacy and honor and continuing the family name like we were royalty instead of middle-class people from Indiana who paid bills on time and kept Christmas decorations in the attic. But she didn't hand it to him. She handed it to me. "I've had this tucked away for years," she said, placing it in my open hand like she was transferring a responsibility more than a possession. "Your grandfather told me to give it to the one who reminded him most of himself. Not the loudest, not the most praised. The one who stayed quiet and kept going." I stared down at the watch, the way the scratched glass caught the light, the way the leather band had molded to Grandpa's wrist, and now seemed ready to take on mine. I didn't say anything, not because I didn't have questions, hell, I had 1,000, but because I knew this wasn't a moment for questions. It was a moment for receiving. "He needs attention," she said after a beat, eyes not leaving mine. "Always did. Since he was a boy. He's not bad. Just hollow in ways he doesn't understand yet. But you? You never needed the applause. You just needed time. Something caught in my throat then, not a sob, not a tear, just something heavy and unfinished that had been stuck there since I was maybe 10 years old, watching my brother get handed things with open arms while I got handed instructions and told not to drop them. And for the first time, I didn't feel bitter about it. I just felt known. The door creaked behind us and we both turned. Dad stood there, silent as always, holding a mug of coffee that had probably gone cold. His eyes dropped to the watch in my hand, and for a moment, there was no expression at all, just the stonewall face he always wore when emotion tried to make an appearance. But then something shifted, just barely. A tightening around the eyes, a softening of the jaw. Not approval exactly. Not forgiveness. Just recognition. Acknowledgement. Maybe even a whisper of regret. He didn't speak. Just nodded once and turned away, footsteps echoing down the hall with the weight of a man who maybe wished he'd seen things a little sooner, maybe wished he'd asked different questions, looked in different directions. Or maybe not. Maybe that was just me projecting. Either way, the silence he left behind said more than words could have. I looked at Grandma again. She was watching him disappear, then turned back to me, eyes gleaming just slightly with something unspoken. Some things can't be bought, she said, slow and certain. But some people? Oh, they're for sale all right. She leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and exhaled like a woman who had just finished the last chapter of a story only she ever truly understood. And I sat there with that watch in my hand, feeling the weight of every moment that had led to this one. Not angry, not triumphant, just still. And somehow that was enough. Monday mornings in the tech world are usually a mix of chaos and caffeine, unread emails screaming from every tab, Slack messages piling up faster than your thoughts can organize, and calendar invites that feel more like handcuffs than reminders. But this Monday wasn't chaos. It wasn't loud. It was still. Quiet in a way that felt orchestrated, like the moment before a string quartet starts playing in a hushed theater. When I walked into the office, there was no tension in the air, no whispered rumors in the break room, no sudden movements. Just a strange calmness, like the building itself knew something had been removed and was adjusting to the new weight. Ben's name was gone from the system by 9:30. No internal memo, no all-hands meeting, no "we wish him well on his journey," platitude wrapped in empty corporate language. Just gone. His profile wiped from the org chart, his desk already cleared, his access badge listed as deactivated in the admin log. It was the most silent resignation I'd ever seen, and somehow that made it feel heavier than if he'd gone out with a bang or a tantrum or some smug LinkedIn essay about pivoting into new opportunities. By noon, my inbox had started lighting up. Not from the board, not from investors, but from employees, current and former, who had waited for this moment like people wait for weather to change. Quietly, endlessly, with that strange kind of hope that something might finally give way. The messages weren't long, and they didn't need to be. Just a steady stream of "thank you, took long enough," and "he was a nightmare to work for." A few were more personal. One engineer said Ben had taken credit for his work 3 quarters in a row. Another described being screamed at during a Zoom call for asking about project timelines. A woman from HR wrote that she'd once reported his behavior to the higher-ups and was told to document more thoroughly next time, like his toxicity needed a spreadsheet before it could be acknowledged. I read each one, every word. And for every line I scanned, every small gratitude typed out in pixels, I felt something strange and unfamiliar begin to stir in me. Not pride, not vindication. It was quieter than that. A kind of responsibility, maybe. The weight of knowing that when you finally remove a tyrant, there's still the wreckage they leave behind. And it becomes your job to rebuild. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't expected to see: Mom. She never called during work hours unless it was urgent or emotional, usually both. I let it ring for a moment, staring at the screen, wondering if she knew, how she knew, and what she wanted to say that couldn't wait until the next family gathering where she could smooth over the cracks in person with casseroles and nervous smiles. I answered on the fourth ring. She was already crying. Not sobbing, not hysterical, just that soft, breathy kind of crying where every word sounds like it's pushing through a storm. She asked why I hadn't told her. Asked how long I'd known. Asked what happened to the little boys who used to play with Legos on the living room floor, who used to build castles and robots and towers out of plastic and dreams and sibling rivalry. Why didn't you say something sooner? She asked, voice trembling. And the answer came so easily, I didn't even pause. Because I wanted a brother, I said. Not a rival. She didn't respond at first. Just breathed. Just let the silence carry all the things neither of us could name. I think, deep down, she knew. Not about the company or the deal or the power shift, but about the fracture. The long, slow drift between us that had started years ago and had only grown wider with every unspoken word and unacknowledged slight. She knew, and maybe that was why she cried, not because I had acted, but because I had waited so long to stop pretending everything was fine. After the call ended, I sat in my office alone, lights dimmed, door closed, the kind of stillness settling over me that only comes after emotional fallout. I leaned back in my chair, hands steepled beneath my chin, thinking not about what came next for the company or the staff, or the budget meetings on the horizon. I was thinking about Ben. Not the executive. Not the loudmouth. But the boy with the scraped knees and the crooked grin who used to laugh too loud and throw baseballs too hard. And I wondered if he'd ever forgive me. Or if he'd ever forgive himself. When I got home that evening, the sky was already slipping into twilight, that beautiful in-between moment where the day tries to hold on just a little longer, even as the night insists it's time to let go. I kicked off my shoes, loosened my collar, and dropped my bag by the door. On the kitchen counter was an envelope. It was heavy. Not physically, but in a way that felt old and waiting. No name on the front. No return address. Just one word in Dad's handwriting, sharp and familiar and unmistakable. Ethan. I stared at it for a long while, longer than I meant to, the edges soft under my fingers, the paper thick and folded with care. I didn't open it. Not yet. I don't know why. Maybe I wasn't ready. Maybe I didn't want to know what was inside because the not knowing still held possibilities. Words of apology? Words of anger? Some final declaration from a man who had never been much with words in the first place? So I placed it in the drawer of my desk, unopened. And for now, that was enough. Thanksgiving came around like it always does, just cold enough to make your breath visible in the morning, and just sentimental enough to force families back under one roof, whether they're ready or not. The leaves were mostly gone, scattered across the lawn like forgotten promises, and the house felt smaller than I remembered, maybe because fewer voices were filling it, or maybe because silence tends to make the walls feel closer. Either way, the air was different this time, not just from the season, but from the absence that sat at the table like a ghost in a folding chair. Ben wasn't there. His name wasn't brought up, not directly, not in any way that opened the door to a real conversation, but he was everywhere in the gaps, the empty seat, the untouched place setting that Mom laid out anyway like muscle memory had overpowered common sense. The way Dad kept glancing at it without realizing he was doing it. It wasn't hostility. It was more like grief, but without the clarity of death to make sense of it. A slow mourning for something that had cracked but never quite shattered, still sharp enough to bleed, but not broken enough to bury. Mom was distant, floating through the motions like someone stuck between traditions she didn't want to lose and a reality she didn't know how to accept. She smiled when she had to, refilled glasses too often, and kept asking everyone if they were warm enough like it was a question that might fix something if asked just one more time. I caught her looking at me more than once, not with blame, but with that soft, searching gaze only mothers have, the kind that scans your face like it might reveal the child she used to know buried beneath whatever you'd grown into. Dad nodded at me when I walked in. That was it. A nod, A gesture so small and restrained it might have gone unnoticed if I hadn't been waiting for anything more. He didn't speak to me directly until I was halfway through my second helping of mashed potatoes, and even then it was just a remark about the weather, tossed out like bait, like a man who wanted to connect but couldn't figure out how to tie the hook anymore. I gave him back what I could: small talk, polite acknowledgement, nothing too heavy, and it seemed to be enough. Or maybe not. Maybe we were both just pretending. Grandma was there, of course, in her usual chair by the window, watching the wind play with the trees and the neighborhood kids tossing footballs between driveways. She looked smaller than she had at Easter, like time had finally started tapping her on the shoulder, but her eyes were still sharp, still watching, still cataloging everything in that quiet, knowing way she had. When our eyes met, she smiled, not wide, not smug, just the gentle satisfaction of someone who'd seen a long game finally land the way she expected. She didn't say much all dinner, but she didn't need to. Her presence said enough. After the dishes were cleared and the kitchen buzz faded into background noise, I slipped away to the den, the old wood-paneled room that still smelled like her perfume and dust and old books. I sat down at her desk, same place I'd sat months earlier when she gave me Grandpa's watch, and this time I pulled out the envelope that had waited patiently in my desk drawer ever since Dad left it for me. I hadn't opened it, not because I was afraid, exactly, but because unopened things still hold potential. They can be anything until they're defined. Hope, regret, praise, disappointment, until you read the words, all of it lives in limbo. But that night, with the house humming softly around me and the weight of a half-healed family pressing against the windows like cold air, I opened it. There was only one line. You were always enough. I just didn't know how to say it. I read it once, then again, and again. And then I sat back in the chair, eyes stinging in a way I hadn't felt in years, not since I was a kid, and scraped my knee so hard the blood pooled in my sock. The tears came slow, not dramatic, not performative, just real. The kind of cry that leaks out of you when you've held too much for too long and finally something cracks in just the right way. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at him. Not at Ben. Not at the years I'd spent chasing a version of success I thought I needed to prove something. Because maybe I had needed to prove it. Maybe that's what it took to realize I didn't. Later, when I rejoined the others, the house was dimmer, quieter, full of leftover smells and half-drunk wine and half-heard laughter. I watched Mom hug my cousin goodbye like she might break if she let go too fast. I saw Dad linger by the door like a man not sure if he should say more, then decide against it. Grandma looked at me one last time before I left and said, simply, "Good. Now keep going." As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I realized the real inheritance wasn't the watch or the letter or the nod from my father. It was the knowledge that I had survived the story they wrote for me, and I had rewritten it without anyone's permission. Maybe I won, or maybe I lost something bigger trying to prove I didn't need to. But one thing's for sure, some dinners change everything, and some silences say more than applause ever could. So, what would you have done? Would you have said something at that dinner, or just let him believe the lie?